on what it takes to be an actor. So I have some questions prepared, and if that's okay with you, we could just run through it. And I feel like if we get through half, even most of these questions, I think it'll be a really compelling panel, and there's a lot for us to learn from you. So my first question would be, can you share your journey from the early days of your career to where you are now, and what are some pivotal moments along the way?
Well, I actually went to Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, first on a voice performance scholarship in the opera theater department. And then I switched my major to theater, and then I dropped out. Don't do that, children. Stay in school. And I moved to New York in the late 70s. And I did the wait the tables, try to get an agent to look at you, workshops for free for a couple of years. And then at the end of 79, I did a project, and then the following month, in January of 1980, I got a multiple year to do act on another project, and that was the beginning of not having to do anything else, and that was 1980. I feel very fortunate, that I've been able to make a living at the business. Let's get real. The business kind of sucks, but I love the work.
Of course.
Yeah.
Let me ask, how has the acting industry evolved over the decades, and how have you adapted to these changes?
I don't know that for me, the acting part of it has changed that much, other than I hope I've gotten better at it. God knows, I go, just something I did in 1984, and I'm like, oh my God, stop acting. Just say the words, just stop acting. But it's always been, for me, it started in music. I had a very good music teacher, and it was all about getting to the truth behind the notes. It's not about performing the notes. It's about getting to what are the notes and the words trying to say, and it translates to acting. It's not, people say, how do you memorize all those lines? And I'm like, that's the last thing that you ever think about. There's a whole process of analyzing a script, deciding what the theme of the piece is, what your character, how your character feeds into that. And then you divide your scenes into beats and intentions. What do I want? What are my obstacles? What am I willing to do to get it? And then you write out, under the words you're saying, this is what I do, I write out what I'm thinking. Well, by the time I do that, the words have memorized themselves. And if the scene is written, I call it with emotional logic, it memorizes itself. You memorize the emotional logic of your journey in a script. So the lines are there. At least that's how it works for me. I started in daytime, where there were so many pages a day. I mean, you could have, I had 40, 50 pages of dialogue a day when my stories would hit the front burner. And you can't memorize words. If I tried to memorize words, forget it. I try to memorize, what does the character want? And this, if I may say, is why villains are easier to play than heroes. I've played superheroes, I've played psychopaths, and both of my Emmys are for the latter, or for psychopaths, because you know what? Villains move the story. They always know, to a very intense degree, what they want, what they're willing to do to get it, almost anything. So you have a wide open canvas, and they drive the plot. In shows where I have had to play the leading man, the challenge is, how do I keep this active? Because the villains are acting on me, and I have to respond. And it's also a challenge for the writers. How do you keep your lead or hero, whatever you want to call it, how do you keep that active? Flashy parts. So I actually find, the villains are the flashy parts. You win awards playing villains. And I actually find the good guys harder to play for that reason. Maybe that says something about my character and personality. I hope not.
Yeah, maybe the villain is more fun.
I always know when people are coming up what project they've seen.
Yeah.
Like within the last 10 years. If someone comes up to me like this, I know it's Project A. If they come up to me like this, I know it's Project B. And so right off the bat, I go, I'm really sorry. First of all, let me apologize for that character.
I was going to ask, how do you stay emotionally connected to your characters, especially in long-running projects?
That's the fun.
Yeah.
And it's also about staying close to the people you're working with. Not that you have to be best friends off stage.
Right.
I recently worked in a project where this young actor that who shall remain nameless because of the strike, we had a very close relationship on camera. And it was a combination of the roles we were playing, the role I had played,
right,
the role that he was assuming, the fact that he knew, the fact that I knew what taking on a particular iconic role might be like.
Yes.
You know,
huge pass the torch moment, yeah.
What his insecurities might be.
Right.
And once I found out he was such a great guy and so truthful and honest about his work, my whole job was just to hold a mirror up to him, to show him all the wonderful qualities that I saw in him that I knew would make him great in the role that he was playing. Well, that fed right into the father-son character support. So sometimes, you know, I never knew if the character was talking to the character, if an old actor was talking to a young actor, or if the person we were talking to each other. And when that all comes together and the acting disappears, that's when you get a real connection. And that's what turns me on about acting.
It's awesome. It kind of actually leads to my next question, which was, have there been any mentors or fellow actors who have significantly influenced your craft? And can you share any valuable lessons that you've learned from them?
Well, yeah. I mean, I always relate this one experience. It is about learning how to be private on camera or on stage. Lee Strasberg, the method, which has been much maligned and much misused and abused, but the true form of it is about how can I get as private as possible in front of other people. There's a private moment exercise. And I always think of this one show I was doing, and the camera was on, but nothing was happening. It was a break, and it happened to be pointed at this particular actress. And she was just sitting at a table waiting for the break to be over, and she was thinking her thoughts. And I looked up and I saw her in the monitor, and I said, oh my God, she's so beautiful. And then I saw her notice that the camera was pointed at her. And her entire energy changed, and the magic of the privacy that I was so drawn to disappeared, because now suddenly I'm being watched. You know, it's like the old thing. Don't show me that you're opening the door. Open the door. Right. There's a great story about the Luntz that were a famous theater family back in the day, the golden age of theater. They did plays together, and there was this one line in a play that they were doing where Mrs. Lunt had to ask for a cup of tea. They didn't expect a laugh. And so she asked for the cup of tea. There's this tremendous laugh in the Broadway theater. And she thought, oh my God, I had no idea. That was funny. Every time she did it, she got less of a laugh until the laugh disappeared. And she went to her husband. She said, Alfred, what am I doing wrong? How did I lose the laugh? And he said, you stopped asking for a cup of tea and started asking for a laugh. Isn't that a great story?
Yeah.
I always try to remember that, you know. What you do simply. That's this recent project that I just did. It's what I loved about the first character I played on it, was we were in a confined space.
Right.
Yeah, we couldn't do our business. We couldn't, you know, do our little tricks.
Yeah,
all we could
was here.
do, right.
So you have to keep it small, keep it real.
Yeah, just make a connection. Look at each other, connect with the human being, and tell the truth. And that's the purest form of acting.
And that must have been so heavy for you in your thoughts, in your mind, with everything you've done, how long you've portrayed this certain character, and then, like, again, a passing the torch moment. Was it hard to draw those emotions, or was it just so real?
People beautifully ask us, because these scenes were beautifully, beautifully written. One was as beautifully written as the next. I'd get done with one father-son scene, and I think, well, that's it. There's no other way to write that scene. And then they'd come up with a different way, you know? And people always say there was a lot of emotion involved because there were heightened circumstances. The stakes were huge. And people say, how did you work up that emotion? And I said, the problem working with someone like Grant was never working up the emotion. The problem was always, don't let the emotion run away with you. I mean, it's all fine and good. You know, if you're on stage with an actor and you're having this great, cathartic, emotional experience and you don't leave room for the audience, you know, the point isn't for us to act for each other or ourselves. You know, you gotta leave room. So I said, the problem, since the scenes were so beautifully written, and since he always spoke from his truth, and since there were so many overlapping circumstances, you know, that once he came up to me, he said, I've been working for whatever, 18 hours, 3 days in a row. I know I'm supposed to break down here. I'm afraid the waterworks aren't going to be there. I said, don't. It's the last thing you should think about. Right. I said, we know the lines. Let's walk in, pick up those phones, look at each other, take a minute, and tell each other the truth. I tear up now thinking about, you know, and he went. He just dissolved. And when it's like that, and when it's real, that's why I do this.
Yeah, it was so beautiful, and you could tell that it was genuine. You weren't putting it on, you weren't acting per se. It was just like a real moment on screen, and also like that mirrors your real life, and it came across so genuine.
It's real life.
Yeah, absolutely. I ask you, how important is ongoing training and self-improvement in acting even after many years in the field?
It's as important as it is for an athlete or a singer or a dancer. You know, one of the people you asked about, people that I admired and have admired for a long time, Al Pacino, I have admired and looked up to because he never plays it safe. Right?
Right.
He'll take these it's very easy to go, okay, I'm just going to keep everything very close to my chest. And I'm just not going to take any risks. And I'm just going to be very cool and deliver my lines, and it's going to be fantastic. Well, that's not Al Pacino. Al Pacino takes it all the way out there. He'll risk, but he carries his truth all the way out there. You know what I mean? So I always think of him as a wonderful example. And after he was a star, he would still go to the Moscow Arts Theater. He would still go see rehearsals of that theater, very famous theater that the Stanislavski technique came out of. Because you have to constantly train. You have to constantly train. You fall into all kinds of bad habits. You fall into your little tricks. I remember doing a project. It was basically a ripoff of Lethal Weapon, and it was a spelling project, and it was a pilot for a TV.
Okay, yeah.
Man, I thought I was being so cool. I was like, I'd get done with work, and I'd go look at dailies, and I'd go, good for you. I saw it put together, and I had to stop watching. It was revolting. It was an actor acting into a mirror, looking at himself, thinking he was all that. And as soon as I see that in any performance, it turns me right off. So I pretty much stopped looking at dailies. Because that's another trick. You look at the dailies, the thing that's shot that day. You look for all the things, you look for all the wrong things. How do I look? Well, that's up to the cinematographer and the lighting person. It's good to know generally what your good lighting is, but all right, how did I say this line? What gesture did I make? You look at all the externals, and then you start acting from the outside in. Instead of, if you're going to look at dailies, say, do I believe what I just said? Do I believe it or don't I believe it? Because it's little tiny moments stacked one on top of another. You guys know when you're being put on. You know when an actor is lying to you or manipulating you. And it's the fastest way to lose an audience. And that's why I don't care if it's the tiniest moment. Sometimes actors are pains in the you-know-what, because we're like, wait a minute, that didn't make sense. The very first version of this franchise part that I did for many years,
right.
There was a moment when I was talking to my coworker. And it was a moment where I'm bearing my soul, but the way it was written, I didn't relate to it. So I went to Danny Bilson and I said, Danny, I just don't think this is what he needs to say to her at this moment. So Danny, being an awesome collaborator, said, well, what do you think he needs to say? I said, well, I'm not sure, but I think it's something, he needs to tell her something about this, something about that. It needs to come from this place. He said, well, then say that. I said, okay, what did I just say? And so it's just about, it's respecting your audience enough not to lie to them.
Right. And do you feel like being vulnerable to making mistakes, taking risks is very important? Like, if you could expand on that a little bit, just being vulnerable.
In singing, there was this great singer doing a master class, working with a tenor who was being very careful on his high notes, and he was like, you could tell that he wasn't interested in what he was supposed to be conveying. He was interested in, and she asked him, but why are you doing that? Why are you being so? He said, well, I don't want to crack. And she said, so what we're seeing is not the character, and we're not hearing the music. We're looking at a tenor who doesn't want to crack. Great. She said, if you don't crack, you don't win. If you don't risk, you don't win. You have to be, well, of course. How do you ever learn anything? I have struggled all my life with an unwillingness to do anything that I don't already do well. Right? Well, that's pretty limiting. You never learn anything new. You've got to have the courage to be bad, at something. You all know this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know in your own lives. You gotta be willing to get out there and make a fool of yourself and make mistakes and learn from your mistakes and adjust and say, well, I did this and this and this. This I like because it's truthful. That I didn't believe a word of it. So why didn't I? How do I correct it? How do I do better next time? How do I not repeat the same mistake in the next scene, in the next role? And that's what's fascinating about series TV, is you have a chance to fix. You don't have as much time as you do on stage or on film, but you have an opportunity if you see an episode and you go, okay, that's not right for him. The audience, that's not why audiences have related to this iconic character for 70 years. That's not it, John. That you missed the mark. So why? What were you thinking about? And it's usually I was trying to be impressive.
Yeah, maybe you were overthinking it.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
You just let it run.
Another interesting thing that a director said to me right at the outset of my career, and I've always held on to it, it was like I was doing the lead in this play, this while I was still trying to get an agent, and a very interesting part, I was doing all my homework, and I was writing it all out, and what am I really saying? What do I really want? And I was working it so hard that it was stressful for people to watch. And the director came up to me and said, John, once you've done your homework, you turn it in. And I got it. He said, you've done.
It's there, so you
trust that it will be there.
Right.
It's
there, so you can draw on it. Just don't overthink it.
Yeah. You don't have to. It's I hate that analogy, beating a dead horse, but I love animals, so I don't like that analogy. But
Well, there's this great idiom speaking on the catalyst for growth is being uncomfortable and challenging yourself.
Bless you.
Yes, God bless you. Happy Sunday. So yeah, here we'll just skip past what I was.
No. You were getting ready to say something that was
yeah,
really
so,
interesting.
You know, there's this idiom about how a lobster can only shed its skin and grow because the catalyst for the growth of the lobster is because it's uncomfortable in its shell. So it needs to realize that it's uncomfortable and break away.
Break its own shell.
Yes, so that it can form a new shell and grow. And the catalyst for that growth is discomfort. So would you say that, again, just to touch on what we've already been speaking about, that challenging yourself and being vulnerable helped you grow as an actor?
Totally. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it also helps when you've had leading ladies like Julianne Moore and Judith Ivey.
Yes.
And when you've worked with actors the stature of Jason Patrick, and you know, and just so many people that I'm leaving out right now, that that you observe how they go about it. And that it's not about ego. It's not about ego. You got to get the ego out of the way, which, by the way, is why I love conventions. And I think not only is it fun and we get to meet each other and it's a kick and we get to dress up, but in our divided society, here we come, we check our egos, our politics, our religion, all that stuff we check at the door. I don't belong in here. And we come in here and we meet person to person and we bond around our love of one thing, this pop cultural art form, and what it has meant to us at various periods of our life, depending on what we were going through. I've had people tell me the most incredible things. I had it happen today. A young man came up to me and was talking about how he had watched the original show with his grandfather, who had recently passed away, so that when he saw me, it brought back the memories of his relationship with his grandfather. And he's a wide open soul. He teared up. He allowed himself to be vulnerable to me, and he apologized. And I said, man, don't apologize. You just gave me the greatest gift, the gift of your willingness to share. You know, if this guy and I passed each other on the street, we might get into an argument about something, but not in here. Not in here, you know. We're people to people, and that's why I love doing conventions.
Well, we definitely appreciate you coming out to the convention. And I know you travel a lot for conventions, you know, going to different countries. And what are some of your experiences, and what's the reception in other countries as opposed to here in the U.S.? It
is off the hook. I've done conventions, you know, Paris, London, Dublin, but South America. I've done Lima, Peru, Guayaquil and Quito, Ecuador. I've done Santiago, Chile. Sure, I'm leaving something out. Mexico City. Man, it was a book fair, Comic-Con, where I was the only actor in Lima, Peru. And it was also a cultural event that involved the city. I was the only actor there. Now, I wasn't the only reason everybody was there. It was a book fair. It was a cultural event. But it was outdoors in an amphitheater. There were jumbotrons. There was a stage that went out into the audience that was above there were over 100,000 people there. I had a security detail of these 5 radical dudes. You know what I mean? It's like, I couldn't get them to crack a smile, man. They were like on it. At one point, I wanted to go to the bathroom, so I had to go from where I was to where the bathroom was. Well, there were people surrounding the enclosed area where I was. So we tried to go and weren't afraid to. People, they were so enthusiastic, not cynical at all, and they weren't afraid to be enthusiastic. And so they would scream and they'd press in, and at one point the guys got there. One of the security people put his arm around my waist and practically lifted me up and moved me through the crowd. I was like, man, I'm a rock star for one weekend. And then I went back to New York and I couldn't get a call back. You know what I mean? So, you know, you wonder why actors are crazy. We have high highs and, you know, it always goes back and forth. But that's one thing that I do love about the audiences, particularly in South America. You know, it's like Sometimes, and it rarely happens at conventions because people come in here, it's pretty pure, but there was a convention that's been going on a long time, and I did pick up a little attitude of, you think you're all that, don't you?
Really?
Well, I'm here to show you that I'm not impressed. And that will kill anything that's offered. That's why when you go see the theater, when you come to a convention, a lot of the experience that you have depends on you, what attitude you bring in with it. And then if we are halfway decent human beings and respond to the affirmation and the affection and the interest that we're getting, then that builds notice to, and you could have, fun and a really good experience. And one thing I noticed about Lima and Santiago and these places that I've been is that there's none of it. It is like if they are excited to see you, they will let you know. And it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. But it's important also at the same time, I jokingly say I was a rock star at a weekend. One thing I constantly remind myself, and I think actors, we always should, if we have people who come up to us and appreciate a certain role, is that it's not about us. It's not about me. I constantly say to myself, it's not about me. And I try to figure out, particularly if the person gets emotional, okay, what role are they talking about? When did I do that? How old are they now? How old must they have been when they connected with that particular character? And I wonder what they must have been going through that caused them to grab on to whatever I was playing then. And I just try to put my full focus on that person, and it helps. It's not always successfully. I have an ego like everybody else. Acting is a bruising business. But as long as we remind ourselves, it's not about us. It's about whatever experience the person who bonded with you was having when they saw a particular role.
That's awesome. I wanted to ask you also, acting can be demanding. So I wanted to know, how have you managed, are there any strategies balance your personal life with your career successfully? And are there any strategies for maintaining mental and emotional well-being in the challenging profession of acting?
Well, I'm a big proponent of therapy. I've been in therapy all my life. I remember once I was doing a show, and I started off, and it was in the 80s, as a really good guy, which I had previously played for 4 years. So I came on as a really good guy, opposite great actresses, Julia Pagano, Julianne Moore, Steven Weber, and I took that character in 10 months all the way out to stark raving mad. And I remember Kathy Hayes, who was an older actress on the show, passed away recently. And we were doing this one scene where I've kidnapped them, I've mined everything. If they try to get out, they're going to blow up. I'm threatening to incinerate us all, a la Waco, I'm like, and I'm laying on the bed and the stuff, and she's like cradling me, and the character's totally lost. He's totally losing it. And I remember her taking me to one side and saying, "Kiddo," that was her word, "Kiddo, if you're going to play these kinds of parts, you're going to have to learn how to protect yourself, or they will make you sick." And I was like, "Well, Kathy, first of all, thank you. I don't know any other way to get there other than to go there." Right. I once had to play a part that had such a longing, and I knew I was going to be on a sterile sound stage, and I was going to need to go somewhere to pull up that longing. And so for the purpose of that role, I flew into San Antonio, and I drove the highway right along the Rio Grande, and I would stop in these towns. There would be a town that I remember this one building, and it was peeling paint, and you can see the evidence of how it had been a drugstore, it had been a ballet studio, it had been a this, it had been a warehouse, and the various paint was peeling off. I mean, the proverbial gate, broken hinge, and I tried to find like a cinder block motel, hopefully with a flashing neon light, and keep the curtain open and have that all, so that when I got back into the sterile confines of a studio in New York,
Right.
all I had to do was go there.
Right. Just close your eyes and you can picture, you can hear the sounds, see the sights, and just like be in that
And that's what I used.
That's amazing.
For that, and that got my first Emmy. I was very grateful.
You've likely worked extensively in both theater and film.
Yeah.
I want to know, what are the key differences in your approach when performing on stage compared to in front of the camera, and how do you adapt to each medium?
I love going back and forth. The next thing I'm scheduled to do is a stage production. It's a theater I've worked at. It's a 600-seat theater in Pinehurst, North Carolina. It's a performing arts center attached to a university. And that community is really supportive of theater. I did 12 Angry Men on stage there like 4 or 5 seasons ago. I'm to go back and do A Few Good Men with an actor, David Gregory, who played my eldest son on One Life to Live in 2010, 2012. And so we were going to get to go at each other again.
So awesome.
And so I try to go back and forth because you get the live audience reaction. You get to do it more than once. You get to do it night after night. You get to know what works, what doesn't. I did a play on Broadway. It won the Tony. It was from the Abbey Theatre in Dublin. It was Dancing at Lunasa by the great Brian Friel. Every night I performed that play, I could find something. As deep as you wanted to go in that play, there was something more to find. 7 months, 8 performances a week. If I would show up, there was always something down there more to find about this character. And so I love that. The primary difference is when you're in theater, you have to project, and I don't just mean vocally, although vocal is part of it, you have to project even the intensity of your feeling to the back row of a 2,000 or 3,000 seat house, In film, and this was a struggle for me because I started in theater, the note I would get, and you'll see this in my even my recent performances, and now I shouldn't give this away because you'll be going, "Oh, John, do less. Do less." But that is the note that I would get when I started working on camera. It's like you go out to a theater audience. You pull an audience into you through the camera lens when you're on camera.
So stage is big, screen is small.
Yeah, it's just a different... And it's nothing I say, okay, I'm going to make this gesture smaller. It's the attitude that when the camera's here, it's like, I've got to pull it in closer. And when I'm on stage, I've got to make sure the guy sitting in the last row in the balcony gets it.
Right. And does that affect the auditioning process as well when it comes to auditioning for stage versus auditioning for screen?
Absolutely. The hardest thing we've had since the advent of COVID was we stopped doing in-person auditions.
Right.
And we started having to self-tape and send in. I hate that because I don't have anyone to bounce off of. I love going into a room with the producers are there, the director is there.
Same.
The casting, yeah.
Because you might just gain a connection with them personally, and they're like, you know what, I like this guy.
Right.
But you can't get that same thing when you're auditioning through Zoom or through, or you're just doing self-tape.
No, you can't.
Yeah, it's not the
And
same.
plus,
You can't establish a rapport.
You may come in there and think, they may look at you when you walk through the door, and they think, "No, this guy didn't really write." I've had this happen. But at the end, say there are 3 scenes. At the end of those 3 scenes, I see them looking at me differently. And then the director has the possibility of saying, "Okay, you did it that way. Try it this way."
Right.
So you get the collaboration. I can convince people of it in the room. When you're submitting your tapes, you know what they're doing? They're ordering their lunch. They're arranging for their babysitter to be picked up from kindergarten. They've got the computer set up. They're running through tapes. Yes, no, no, yes, no, yes. They don't often watch an entire scene. I think in 44 years as a professional actor, I've been cast off of a taped audition maybe twice. It's always when I can get in the room, and that's one of the issues that we're addressing also with the strike. We're saying, casting directors, get back in your offices. It's easier for them, but then they're not really casting directing, are they? It's like they're processing auditions that other people have done and taped and produced and shot, and you have your own background, you fix your own lighting. So we're really encouraging casting directors and producers to get back to live auditions,
Yes.
and you know what I'm talking about.
100%. And I actually wanted to ask you also, what advice do you have for actors when it comes to auditioning and handling rejection? Because I know that's a really big part of it.
You better be ready. I mean, there's a whole lot more rejection.
So much. You hear 99 no's before you maybe hear one yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And my dad, actually, who was a progressive, it's sort of an oxymoron, a progressive Baptist minister. He died a year ago, January.
I'm sorry.
Man who talk about always pushed the limits of his belief, always willing to learn something new, to go, well, I used to believe that, but it doesn't really measure up with what my experience. He was always pushing the boundaries of his faith and his belief. And one thing he said to me, he said, because while he was supporting himself in college, he sold insurance for a while. He said, there's that moment when you're in the hall and you're looking at the door and you're like, I may knock on this door and he may throw my butt back out into the hallway. But I'm in the hallway now. So what have I got to lose? Yeah. Knock on the door. Yeah, you better be ready. I just read the most brilliant thing. And it said part of being an audience is not to confuse rejection with failure.
That's great. Absolutely, because if you try, you didn't fail, because at least you put yourself out there. But if you never try, then ultimately that would be the failure. If you don't put yourself out there again, be vulnerable, and at least knock on that door. Like you said, don't wait in the hallway, because what's the chance? You're already there, so just go for it.
And it's a process, You first of all, you don't get any bites. Then you get a nibble. Then you get, in my case, my first role, and I think we're striking against daytime, so I can actually tell this story. I got an under 5, man. It was my first time on television. Done a couple of plays. Told my whole family I was going to be on this iconic daytime show. And my role was to ask a very iconic lady in a gym scene for her autograph. So, man, I was ready. I had like 5 lines. I was my big breakthrough. And so I go in and we do the rehearsal and, we get along great and everything goes fine. And then they have lunch and then they taped it. That's the way that show did it. Well, during lunch, I'm sitting in the makeup room and here comes the director. And he said, I don't know how to tell you this, man, but the show is long and we have to cut your scene. But you'll be back. So you gotta, I remember one time, first time I was on with no lines. I had all the family gather at Christmas. I was gonna walk through the background, You wanna know what the camera saw? The only way you knew it was me was I wore my own sweater and the shot was from here to here. And they said, oh, that's Johnny. So, it's a process, but when
100%. I have a similar story. I was cut on scene. I was on a national commercial, and I'm in my wardrobe. The director looks at me and he goes, "Go sit in holding for a moment." I'm in holding, and I see somebody else come in. They start fitting them in the same wardrobe that I had on, and I got the day rate, but I lost the commercial because I booked it and then I unbooked it on set.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, but it's, it
None of that
happens.
was about you.
No, not at all. It was what the client wanted, and I didn't take it personal. I mean, at the time, I was a little
Of course you
upset
took it
because
personal,
I'm like,
man.
oh,
Of
national
course you-
commercial, 2 markets. Oh my gosh, it would have been great, but it happens.
It happens. It happens. But you got to roll with it. And here's the thing, and that's why I separate the business from the work.
Yeah.
I can truly say I hate the business, and I can truly say I love the work. Because the work is really at its purest, and I love working with young actors too, because when they realize that acting is not what they thought it was, that acting is what we're doing right now. The way you're listening to me, and my words I'm saying for the first time, the way I'm looking at you to get your reaction, to see, if you're smart, if I'm boring you, if it's just like, well, why doesn't he look at somebody else? Whatever it is. I mean, it's what passes between people. That's what acting is. And when actor, but I did. Because they come in thinking acting is, okay, I'm over here and I'm this actor, but I got to come all the way over here to get to be this character. And when they find out that they don't go over there, they bring the character in here. And when they get it, the lights go on. I got goosebumps. It's a very exciting experience to have.
We've had some moments where we've got to talk about, handling criticism and things like that. I wanted to ask, over the years, I'm sure you've received various types of feedback and reviews. How do you handle constructive criticism, and what advice can you give to actors on processing feedback effectively?
I did a project 30 years ago, and the reviews in the New York Times, the LA Times, the Louisville Courier-Journal, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, all the major, Kansas City Star, all the major papers across the country were not good reviews. They were raves. You want to know the review I remember?
Of course.
It was the Associated Press interview, and you know the line I remember? In this one moment, it was a very dramatic scene where I'm holding my brother on the side of the road, and I'm there, and I'm supposed to let out this big yell, and the critics said, at the big climactic moment where this character decides to assume his powers, John Wesley Shipp sounded like he was suffering from a snapped truss. Ouch. But, that's what I remember, I said to Grant Gustin, because, of course, people reviewing projects today that may have been done a long time ago, I said, when you want to judge the quality of your show 30 years from now, don't read the reviews that are written 30 years from now. Go back at the time that you were doing the show and read the reviews that were written at the time. I said, that's my parting gift to you. Because I've read some of the wildest things, people today talking about a show I did in 1990-91. And I'm like, here are the reviews that were, I'll take these reviews, because they don't have the context, they don't have the history, And if he does that 30 years from now, and he goes back and he reads about his stellar reviews, he's going to be very happy.
I agree. And, it's so wonderful that you had a chance to mentor and be like a father figure and give your insight in that respect. And I wanted to ask, how do you see your role in passing on knowledge and mentorship to the next generation of actors, and what contributions would you like to make to the acting community moving forward?
People used to say, I did a show about 20 years ago now with a young cast, and then I recently did a show with a young cast. And I was asked by the press, do you give these young actors advice? And I say, oh God, I hope not. In this most recent experience, I had said, this young actor does not need me to tell him how to do it. He has got his act together. And the work he is doing is some of the finest work I have ever worked with, whether it was Broadway or TV or daytime or primetime or independent film. I said, so he doesn't need my suggestions. Say, I'm here if there's a question to be asked. If, let's say, you know, potentially it was a physically demanding role, let's just say potentially, you know, and that I had been through, I would know where the pitfalls, I'd know where you could conserve your energy. I'd know how important it is to get through a 23-episode season if you're playing a particular kind of role that involves a particular kind of costume and a certain number of hours. How to manage that. You know, but believe me, I tread very carefully because nothing is more insufferable than, you know, me telling young actors, because acting, you said it, it's constantly evolving.
Absolutely.
I learn as much, particularly if, you know, when they're good, like this cast I just recently worked with. They're so good. I learn as much as I give. I hope I give as much as I learn, but you can't go in there like, here, Sonny, here's how you do it.
Yeah.
That's why this particular show that I was in, I didn't go head-to-head in a character that you might have wanted to see me as at the beginning. I went in as a different character, so that it wasn't like, oh, okay, here's how you play this role, kid, because I did it 30 years ago. Well, big deal. You know, this is how I'm doing it today.
Right.
And no, so if the greatest compliment I got was when I was doing a daytime 4-month role, horrible guy, abused his sons, petty thug who had delusions of grandeur of being this big criminal, but always messing up. Very, you know, and the director, there was one director that I worked with, and his lady friend, I don't think they were married, but they had been together a long time. She told me, came and introduced herself once, and he said that her partner, that he had said, you know, John Wesley Shipp, he's done all this, he has awards, he's had primetime, he's had Broadway experience. He said he brings his A game every day. During 5-minute breaks, he's not texting on his phone. He's working with the acting scene saying, how can we make this better? How can we believe it? So my love and my enthusiasm for the work, if there's anything I have to offer, that's what it is. Find your own way, but love. People say, should I be an actor? I'll say my first acting teacher said, if you could be happy doing anything else, go do it. You know, because at any one point we have 90% unemployment in Screen Actors Guild. But if you love the work,
Yeah.
you have no choice.
And on that, I think that's a perfect place to end it. I think this has been an amazing opportunity. Thank you so much for being so gracious with your knowledge and your time.
Thank you.
Will you be at your table for the rest of the day? People could come and visit you at your table?
Yes, I will be going back to my table, and I'll be there until my photo op's at 3:20. I have to get on a plane back to New York because I have a commitment tomorrow morning. But it's been so great talking to you. Your attention has been phenomenal. You know, it's been, I really feel like I feel heard in here with you guys today. So thanks.
Thank you so much. One more time for John Wesley Shipp.